this is in connection with On the Rise, which is a kind of youth deflection initiative that our street is taking part in. I should tell you a little bit about our street. We're a nonprofit, nonpartisan public policy research organization based in Washington, D.C. Our mission is to engage in policy research and outreach to promote free markets and limited effective government. So before we dive in today, a few housekeeping items. First, as you may have heard a second ago, this webinar is being recorded. So we'll be sending out the full recording and also sharing it on YouTube after the event today, at some point after the event. It might not be today, but sometime this week. Second, we want to hear from you. If you have a question, please use the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen or just the chat to ask questions. So we'll be collecting these throughout the presentation and saving some time at the end for Q&A. So deflection. I think one of the best ways to kind of illustrate deflection is to begin with a hypothetical. So when a teenager is picked up for fighting, or shoplifting, I think police often face a difficult choice. Should we involve this young person in the criminal justice system, or should we just let them go? A delinquency charge can dramatically alter a young person's future. Yet a mere warning can leave underlying needs unmet often. So that is where deflection and diversion come in. Throughout today, we may refer to these terms somewhat interchangeably because they are closely related. In fact, juvenile deflection programs are sometimes referred to as pre-arrest diversion programs. They're different program models with the same objective. We want to hold young people accountable for things they did without subjecting them to the negative consequences of an arrest. Both deflection and diversion limit youth contact with the formal justice system, just at different points in the process. Because for me, that's basically the key difference is the point at which it occurs. Deflection for me happens before an arrest, whereas diversion happens after an arrest or a court referral. And I say for me because sometimes these terms are a little vague. And so I think part of the goal of today is to provide some clarity around these and get some working definitions going. I would say, in terms of the differences, it's just that point of when it occurs. Diversion, I would say, provides children with an off-ramp, right, out of the system, away from the system, while deflection keeps kids away from it entirely. The first report I actually ever authored for our street was called Data-Driven Deflection, a Systems Approach to Reducing Juvenile Arrests. And in my research, I quickly discovered that compared to punitive options like probation and detention, deflection achieves superior public safety outcomes at a lower cost to taxpayers. It was actually in that report where I first learned about Cambridge Safety Net, which Dr. Barrett will be speaking about today. And it's not just a theory. This is actually backed by data. This webinar is called The Evidence, so we want to provide some evidence here. Studies show that youth who are deflected from juvenile court are half as likely to be arrested after becoming an adult compared to those who go through the traditional system. That's half as likely. When compared to post-arrest diversion programs, pre-arrest deflection programs are significantly more effective at preventing recidivism, reoffending, future arrests. These models can also realize millions of dollars in cost savings and reduce racial disparities. This has been demonstrated in places like Florida with their civil citation program. I'm going to drop a link in the chat here to not the full paper. This is a much shorter version of the paper I wrote. It's kind of like an explainer version in the chat there. So yeah, click on that. And while we listen to Dr. Barrett and Richard here. Intros. Okay, first, we are joined by Richard Mendel. He's a senior research fellow at the Sentencing Project in Washington, D.C. Richard is a nationally recognized expert who has documented the systemic barriers to delivering effective, equitable juvenile justice in the United States. And his research has documented the growth of diversion programs, and more importantly, where those programs are failing to deliver justice equally to all youth. Second, I'd like to welcome Dr. James Barrett. He's Director of Clinical Support at the Cambridge Police Department and is an assistant professor of psychology in the Department of Psychiatry at Harvard Medical School. Dr. Barrett is one of the folks behind the Cambridge Safety Net Collaborative. This is a nationally recognized model for a multidisciplinary police-led deflection. Dr. Barrett will be sharing how Safety Net not only reduces arrests and recidivism, but also helps connect kids with services they need, often for the very first time. I think we'll get started with Richard here. Richard, you had a bit of a presentation you were going to run us through to begin.
Yeah, thanks so much. So let me I will hold on, wait a sec. Try to share my screen, having trouble here. One second here.
Fine. This worked in the practice run, so hopefully we can have some success here as well.
Hold on. There we go. Sure.
Oh.
It
Looks
work
like
in
it's
the
a presenter view.
I'll have to stop the share 1 second.
Sorry, technical difficulties on the webinar. This is a time-honored tradition of our street webinars, is to have a few technical hiccups. Perfect. Here we go. Looks great. Richard, go ahead.
Okay, great. So as Logan was saying, that I've been writing about.
Do you guys see it? Maybe we should admit.
No.
So maybe can Sophia?
Yeah, Sophia, why don't you take over? Thank you, Rach. Thank you, Rachel Walker from the chat. Yeah. So, Sophia,
sorry about that.
Yeah, we're good. Yeah, Sophia, why don't you take over and we'll do the next slide thing.
Right, and I'll guide you through. So I've been writing about youth justice for a good long time, for 30 years now, and most of my writing over those years and most of the public attention to youth crime and justice issues goes to the worst cases, and it goes to the deepest end of the system, the incarceration facilities. Diversion, on the other hand, hasn't gotten a lot of high-level policy attention, and it hasn't been in the news much. It's been mostly an afterthought. But it shouldn't be. More and more, the research makes clear that expanding and improving diversion and reducing or hopefully eliminating racial and ethnic disparities in diversion really just has to be at the top priority for reform if we ever want to have a justice system that's fair, that keeps communities safe and guides young people towards a positive future. Today, I want to tell you, if you want to go to the second slide, I want to tell you about 6 lessons that I've learned in my research. And the first one is that involvement in the justice system is harmful for youth. The courts just don't seem to have what it takes to steer teens towards a positive and law-abiding future. They're not an effective venue for improving behavioral health or for reversing delinquent conduct. Second, that in light of that research, diversion is vastly underutilized in the United States. The third is that diversion is a point of deep, pervasive, and hugely consequential disparities. The unequal treatment at diversion plays a pivotal role in perpetuating the justice system's vast racial and ethnic disparities in confinement for youth. The fourth is that many common policies and practices employed for diversion unnecessarily exacerbate disparities and limit diversion opportunities. A lot of our diversion practices make no sense at all. Fifth is that there are many constructive reforms available to address these problematic practices, expand the use of diversion, and reduce disparities. And the sixth, as I documented in a recent report, there's a small but growing national movement emerging nationwide to expand and improve diversion. So if we go to the next slide, I'm going to talk about all of those lessons, but first let's start or continue Logan's conversation about defining our terms. What do we mean by the word diversion? Because it's kind of a fuzzy term in juvenile justice. Often it's used to describe virtually any decision that allows a young person to avoid a deeper level of system penetration. It's also used to describe a set of programs or agreements that kids might be required to follow to avoid prosecution in court. But for my purposes in my studies and in my talk today, I talk about diversion only as a decision to address delinquent conduct without involving a young person formally in the court system. And diversion can be specifically, it can be two options. One is pre-arrest diversion, or which is seems to be Logan's definition for deflection, or pre-court diversion, which seems to be his definition for diversion, which means not formally prosecuting a case once a kid is referred to juvenile court on a delinquency charge. Regarding deflection, Logan has this, seems to have a clear idea that deflection is pre-arrest versus court. And that's one definition that I've heard, but I've also heard people talking about deflection as more broadly as a choice either at arrest or at court referral, not to impose any kind of sanction on a young person, rather to decide that the misbehavior is not a matter for the justice system. You can dismiss a case with a warning, you can refer the young person to some other resources that's completely outside of the justice system and close the case without follow-up, or if the misbehavior, well, that would be more of a deflection. I look forward to talking to you about all those deflection options, but first let me go back and do my my 6 lessons about diversion generally. So the first of those lessons, again, is that involvement in the justice system is counterproductive and harmful for youth. The evidence is overwhelming that despite our best intentions, involvement in the justice system does more harm than good with most young people, and that diversion is a superior option for most youth referred to juvenile court most of the time. I'm sorry, you see, if we go now, sorry, that was the defining diversion slide. We go to the next slide. There you go. The single most ambitious, detailed, and carefully controlled study ever undertaken, it was called the Crossroads Study, was completed in 2020, and it involved more than 1,000 young people in 3 jurisdictions across the country, all of them arrested, first-time arrests, for moderately serious offenses that are on the edge of what their local courts would consider for diversion. And the scholars identified these youth and they tracked them over several years and measured their progress on 19 outcomes. And the score for the kids who got formally processed in court was 0 for 19. On none of the outcomes measures did the youth formally processed in court have better results than the kids who were diverted. Youth processed in court were more likely to be rearrested, they were more likely to drop out of school, they were more likely to commit violence, and several other worse outcomes. Next slide. And the study wasn't an outlier. It mirrors the findings of many previous studies, a whole body of research. 2 meta-analyses examined the full body of experimental evidence and found that formal processing leads to much more future involvement in the justice system. One of those studies said that juvenile system processing does not appear to have a crime control effect. In fact, almost all of the results are negative in direction. As Logan was saying, pre-arrest, we have evidence showing that arrests in adolescents have damaging effects on young people's lives. Compared to comparable kids who engage in similar delinquent conduct, those who get arrested are more likely to drop out of school. They're less likely to attend and succeed in college, and they have substantially lower incomes at age 30. And again, there's pretty strong evidence that diverting kids before arrest yields even better, that means deflecting them, yields even better outcomes than informal processing following arrest, diverting them. So now let's go to lesson number 2. Diversion is vastly underutilized. If we go to the next slide, there we are there already. This is the share of cases that gets nationwide of the share of cases referred to juvenile courts on delinquency charges that get diverted. And you can see it just never changes. Every year between 43 and 48%, for as long as we can remember, get diverted, and more than half of them get prosecuted. And we have more and more evidence that diversion works better, but the systems are not responding on the national level. And go to the next slide, and you can see that it really makes us an outlier among nations in not a good way. You can see that we're less than half, but these other nations, 75%, 80%, 83% of the cases, those countries, most of them exclude anyone under 15 years old. So they're using diversion much more, we're using it much less, and to our detriment. So then we go to lesson number 3, which is that diversion is a point of deep and pervasive disparities and highly consequential disparities. These are the overall numbers. This is 2021. I haven't updated. There are numbers for 22, but they're similar. And you can see that on the blue chart, the blue bar at the left is white kids. Basically, half of them get diverted, but only 37% of the black kids, and somewhere in between for kids of other races and ethnicities. If we go to the next chart, you can see that the disparity between blacks and whites is getting worse rather than better. There was a 20% gap in 2005, but it was up to 31% in 2021. So they're getting more disparate rather than less. And then if we go to the last one, we can see that it's not a function of young people's behavior within every offense category. The left bar is the overall numbers that we've already seen, but within every offense category, violent crimes, property crimes, drug crimes, public order offenses, in each one, black kids get diverted less, white kids get diverted more, black kids get prosecuted more, white kids get prosecuted less. And if you go to the next study, those are the overall numbers, but if you look at the carefully controlled research, many studies find that kids of color are less likely to be diverted even after controlling for current offense, offending history, and other variables. At least 20 studies have documented disparate treatment at the diversion phase of the process. And there's also compelling research showing that these disparities in diversion have cascading effects. Earlier involvement in the justice system for youth of color greatly increases the likelihood that they'll be arrested for any subsequent misconduct, and it intensifies the severity of punishments they receive later in the process. So now we go to lesson number 4. Many common policies and practices employed in diversion unnecessarily exacerbate disparities and limit diversion opportunities. So what's causing all of these disparities in diversion? And when I looked at it, I found 2 main factors. And the first is subjectivity and implicit bias. States have exhibited a crippling lack of leadership around the question of diversion. In most states, most of the time, there are no clear rules or policy guidance for the use of diversion. There's no detailed data collected on diversion. There's little or no effort to analyze diversion data by race or ethnicity, and there's no explicit goals to expand the use of diversion or to reduce disparities. Instead, most of the time, in most places, decisions are made about diversion on the fly. The process is idiosyncratic and highly subjective, and we know that whenever subjectivity is allowed to rule in juvenile justice, disparity and bias are soon to follow. So that's half the problem, subjectivity. The other half is a slew of widespread but misguided policies and practices that seem objective on their face, but harm youth of color disproportionately in practice. If we go to the next slide. There's limiting eligibility for diversion to first-time and/or misdemeanor offenses only, which is the long-standing practice in much of the country, but it's not rooted in any evidence. In fact, it's contradicted. Sometimes diversion is most effective for kids who've committed more significant offenses. And this has an enormous impact on racial equity because arrest rates are so much higher for kids of color, and they therefore lose their subsequent opportunities for diversion to stay out of the counterproductive justice system. Other counterproductive policies and practices are employing passive or ineffective methods to inform youth and families about their eligibility for diversion and to recruit them into it. Imposing rules and requirements that make it difficult for parents and families to participate. Requiring youth to admit guilt as a condition for diversion eligibility and charging fees for them to participate. They're structuring diversion like probation with rules and conditions and the threat of prosecution for noncompliance, and they're sending kids back to court for failing just to comply with rules and requirements, which is also common. Now, all of these practices are widespread across the country. All of them are counterproductive. All of them exacerbate disparities. So stepping back for a moment now, we can see that the evidence is overwhelming that our youth justice systems are missing the mark badly right now on diversion. We aren't diverting nearly enough young people with enormous and enormously important disparities and employing many problematic practices for diversion. And that's all the bad news. Fortunately, there's a lot of corresponding good news too. There's many constructive reform steps available to address all of these problematic practices. And if you go to the next slide, the even better news is that, as I documented it in a report last year, there seems to be at least the beginnings of a national movement to expand and improve the use of diversion. If you go to the next slide, my report documented promising diversion reforms undertaken in 23 states and 8 localities over the last 5 to 10 years. The reforms can be grouped into 4 categories: laws, programs, and pathways to expand the use of diversion, efforts to combat disparities in diversion, embracing best practices to improve outcomes for kids once they are diverted, and using data more effectively to build support for diversion and to increase success. I don't have time, unfortunately, to describe these examples of these things, but they're happening all over the country, and they're happening in red states as much or more as in blue states. So there's a lot to be encouraged by in the current trend. Before I go to the next slide, I want to share with you findings from a follow-up paper published last year with additional outcomes from that Crossroads study I was telling you about earlier. After tracking those young people for 9 years now, the scholars found that whether these kids were formally processed or diverted at their first arrest was a life-changing event. Even after controlling for all kinds of factors, the diverted kids were much more likely to desist from offending in both the short term and the long term. The kids prosecuted in court were much more likely to become persistent criminals. Diversion, this study found, is, quote, a critical desistance point in young people's lives. If you go to the next slide, if you're interested, I encourage you, if you go to the next slide, we have at the Sentencing Project a web page all about youth diversion. We're actually, if you bookmark it, I encourage you to. We're in the process of updating it, and we're going to substantially expand it. There's going to have a map with promising initiatives. We're going to have stories of young people who've been through diversion. We're going to have a bunch of policy tools in there too. So I encourage you to do that. And with that, I'll wrap up and turn things back over to Logan. Thanks so much.
Great. Thanks, Richard. I think that provides like a great research base for the rest of our discussion today. So I appreciate that. I want to turn to Dr. Barrett here now for a minute. Dr. Barrett, could you, I had this whole description of safety net written up, but I thought, hey, why not just have you describe Cambridge Safety Net? What, in your own words, what is Cambridge Safety Net?
Cambridge Safety Net is a collaboration among the police department, our major healthcare provider, the schools, and our after schools as the 4 primary pillars, and then we have other partners as well. But it's really intended as a community collaborative to identify young people at risk for delinquency or involvement in the criminal legal system and intervening. And there's 2 ways we can do that. We can recognize that risk ahead of time and intervene. Sometimes that's referred to as deflection. So we just had the International Association of Chiefs of Police conference in Denver last week, and I was on a diversion deflection panel, and people really do use those terms differently. So for some, deflection is kind of like an intervention ahead of time. Our diversion we call police-based or pre-arrest diversion, that we try to use whenever possible. And that is when a young person in our community is committed an offense where there could be a legal charge, and rather than charge, we offer the parent a diversion opportunity. And if they take that, then the collaborative, so that we meet monthly, comes up with what we feel like the conditions of diversion should be. And that involves clinical folks being involved, as well as our youth resource officers. And that is a pre-complaint diversion. I think one of the important things is that if the family or the child at a family, quote unquote, fails diversion, we do not bring a charge forward. So it is voluntary. The whole point behind it is to address whatever the issue was that brought that kid in contact with the police in the first place. And sometimes people say, well, then does it really have teeth behind it? And it doesn't in a lot of ways, but that's not really the purpose of it. If what we say is if someone kind of fails that diversion, then they're unlikely to be given that opportunity again. That's not always the case, but because it's important to note, in Massachusetts, we do have court diversion. So, if the victim insists that they want to move forward with the court charge, then we can also divert at the court level, but that means the young person is going to be brought in front of a magistrate, and they're going to have that first contact that I think, Richard was describing well about the dangers of that first contact with the criminal legal system, even if the case is diverted at court. So what Safety Net allows us to do, in short, is divert at the point of police contact by bringing in our community partners to think together about how can this diversion be useful in addressing the issues that we want to address so the kid doesn't get into trouble any further.
Nice. Okay. Well, yeah, that's a good overview. Did Cambridge, did safety net come out of some kind of initial problem or gap in services that you identified that kind of forged this multi-agency partnership, this cross-disciplinary partnership?
Yeah, and so this safety, the origins of safety net actually date back to about 2008 when our then police commissioner Bob Haas came in, and we didn't have a separate youth officer unit in the Cambridge Police Department. He really noticed like our rates of juvenile arrests were higher than he was happy with. And, you know, in talking to officers, it was kind of like, well, we have two options. You know, we either charge or it's referred to in old school police parlance as brooming, which is kind of like, all right, get out of here and don't let me see you do that again, right? And I think what we mentioned is like, well, it doesn't really address the issue because it's just kind of like scram and get out of here. And I didn't see that. But then the other option is just to charge and send them to court, which, as Richard, I think, just laid out beautifully, it isn't all that effective in deterrence. So he started what we call youth resource officers. A lot of places have school resource officers. We call them youth resource officers because while they're assigned to schools, they're actually also assigned to after-school programs and community events. So the idea is that the officers really get to know the kids in our communities on a number of different levels. And that really helps in terms of if it does come to a diversion, hopefully knowing the families, knowing the players, you know, knowing who's involved. But the gap was exactly that we did not have capacity for any kind of intervention or diversion beyond involving the courts.
Yeah, I love that you brought up the youth resource officer model. This is one of the things that initially really drew me to safety net, because you know, there's so much controversy surrounding school resource officers,
Yes.
and there's debate on, you know, whether they serve to widen the net, or there's just a lot of talk about the problems with them, but I never see a lot of discussion of the solutions and how we could improve school resource officers, right? So I think that the youth resource officer idea really has a lot of promise for other jurisdictions out there. So I'm glad you brought that up. One question I had about I guess you call them YROs rather than SROs, right? So one of the questions I had about YROs, how do you make sure that they are seen by youth and families and school staff as a resource for support rather than just an extension of law enforcement?
Yeah, it's a great question. And you know, in post 2020 and police reform and George Floyd, we had to really fight to keep our YRO program. We had to present to the school committee, and what really sold it was we had all our YROs on the meeting, and it was a Zoom like this, because it was virtual, and they talked about the kids they knew and the work they did. But most importantly, it was the partners and the family standing up and being like, these are our colleagues, and they're an incredible preventative force, and we don't want to lose them. So a couple of things. Our selection of YROs is critically important. So we do something in Cambridge that's really outside of typical police hiring, and that whenever we bring on a YRO, we have a multidisciplinary interview panel that involves school principals, our heads of after-school programs, other youth-serving agencies, so that we don't want to make it that anyone becomes a YRO because they want the schedule of a Monday through Friday, or that they're close to retirement and are thinking of kind of easing out on an easy. We want officers who can work with kids and families, who like working with kids and families. Many of our YROs are former coaches, active coaches now, are former youth after-school program leaders. So it has to be the right officer. And in Massachusetts, we've done a lot of reform to also make sure that YROs are not enforcing school disciplinary policies. They're not taking kids' phones, you know, that they are there as to keep the building safe and as whenever possible as a preventative agent. And we've had other communities completely get rid of their school resource officers in Massachusetts. What we've seen kind of anecdotally is what happens is, when kids then inevitably kind of get in trouble or get involved in higher level crime, it's just patrol coming in who has no sense of how a school works, who the kids are, who the families are, and they'll treat it just like they would any other case. And that leads to a higher level of court referrals. And so that's really been critical to us, is the only way we can do police-based diversion is by having the resources and the officers who can do it and who know how to do it. If you don't have that, then a lot of times what happens are increased referrals to the juvenile court.
Yeah, I just think it's such a interesting model. I mean, kids spend, a lot of their day at school, but there's a lot of the time that they don't spend at school.
Yeah.
And I think if they see police officers just at school, they just kind of identify them as police officers. Whereas if they see them at like a barbecue after school or like a sporting event after school, they kind of get to know them a little better, and they're like, it helps kind of create this persona of interest, right? That the officer is actually interested in them rather than just there for their job.
Yeah, and one other benefit just to note is that, as police recruitment becomes more and more difficult, and we're trying harder to get to get officers who represent their community. The most success we've had recently with younger recruits coming in are those who had a good relationship with their YRO. And there's many who said, I would never have thought of being a police officer, ever, ever, ever. But getting to know Officer Pacheco in the high school is what made me apply for this job, right? And when we talk about YROs, I've been on a lot of panels where they'll say, well, look at this report from X state where the school resource officer led to an 150 increase in disciplinary referrals. Like, well, get them out of there. If it's a bad school resource officer program, they should 100% be removed if they're causing more harm than good. But I don't think we should paint that with such a broad brush. And I think exactly what you said, it's important to look at what are the school resource officer or YRO programs that work and why do they work?
Right. Yeah, that point about recruitment is so interesting. I was not aware of that about Cambridge. Yesterday I hosted another webinar about law enforcement recruitment and retention, and it would have been great to know that yesterday, because I would have loved to highlight Cambridge as a recruitment police recruitment tool, because it is such a crisis right now among law enforcement agencies. So Dr. Barrett, your research has demonstrated statistically significant results across a few different metrics. One of those is lower recidivism, which a lot of different places kind of track. But one result that was interesting to me was that participants in Safety Net also had an increase in mental health care visits, and just increase in mental health care. I have looked at a lot of deflection and diversion programs at this point in my work, and I can safely say that Safety Net is at the very top when it comes to program evaluation. This is something I don't think we do very well in any area of government, particularly the criminal justice system. So I just wanted to commend you for that, and ask you, why such a focus on evaluating Safety Net, and why is program evaluation so important to you, and how do you do it so well?
Thank you. Well, program evaluation is critical, because I think there are a lot of instances where we can be doing harm and not knowing it. Net widening, which was already mentioned, is there's a lot of diversion programs that are kind of checkbox programs, like you do 20 hours of community service at the library, and the nice librarian will sign off on 10, but then you've met like 5 more delinquent peers. And so program evaluation is critical. I think one thing that we've been fortunate about is we have partners in the Health Equity Research Lab, which is affiliated with Cambridge Health Alliance and the medical school. And what we've been able to do, which is pretty cool, is take our police data and merge it with the behavioral health data of Cambridge Health Alliance, then strip it of all identifiers, and be able to look at our trends in terms of service utilization and diagnostics, and I think where we've had success is that collaborative, that safety net collaborative. Where we have the mental health providers in the same room as the officers. We have a release of information sign, so we're not sharing HIPAA protected information. We're not sharing FERPA protected information. All we're saying is, we came across Jamie Barrett. His parents really want him to get some therapy about whatever. They're having a hard time getting through these wait lists. What can we do? And the provider being able to say, you know what, let me talk to intake. We have a postdoc actually with us whose caseload is just to take on referrals from Safety Net. And then what's going to happen is that next meeting, we are going to ask about that and say, what happened with that referral? And that may sound simple, but I'm telling you, I guarantee you, the kids falling through the cracks and saying, oh yeah, I thought we referred them for services. What happened is a prevalent problem when we're dealing with this. So just that holding one another accountable of, are we seeing these services actually catch? Not just they're going to the intake, are they catching? And if they're not, then what do we need to do to revisit? That's really the lifeblood of that safety net model, is that we're checking in and following up. And as providers, we're not saying like, oh, you refer them and you never hear back. We're going to hold one another accountable to make sure that we're getting the results that we want. And I think that's where you've seen the success come in terms of not only the behavioral health referral, but the service utilization. And we're getting that directly from the medical record. So it's not self-report. We're able to actually track that and see that service utilization over time.
Yeah, I love that it comes straight from the records. There's a lot of the research in this space is self-report type of stuff,
Yes.
and that has issues with it that come with it as well. So it's great that it comes directly from the records there. Yeah, it's just getting, like as you say, just getting people in the same room. There's so many diversion programs don't get police together in the same room with school officials, with mental health care service providers. They it's just all over email. It's all kind of remotely done. But just having actual meetings where you can say, hey, what happened to that specific kid? And it really helps. Like as you say, kids not fall through the cracks, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And I'm going to drop in the chat our link to the Safety Net page. If folks want to visit that, we on a gift or a grant rather from the Miller Foundation, we were able to come up with a manual that just lists out how we do things and our processes, and that's PDF downloadable, completely free. So if there's anyone on the call who is interested, if you click on that link, you'll see the link for our manual, and that will give you a sense of how what our operations are, if you're interested in like police-based diversion.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. I appreciate that. So I think I'd like to open it up here for the last 20 minutes or so. I think one thing we should talk about is this question of definitions for a second. The reason I like to talk about pre-arrest diversion as deflection is because I feel like it deserves its own term. I mean, Richard, you went over a lot of the negative effects of even a single arrest, right? You did a great job outlining those negative effects, and there's even more long-term ones. I've read that if a kid is arrested, they are less likely to get married down the line. There are effects that we don't even think about, right? So I think it does make some sense to make a distinction between system off-ramps well, I shouldn't call them off-ramps. It makes sense to make a distinction between program models, I suppose, that happen before an arrest, and like Florida Civil Citation Program is one I like to cite a lot of the time. So there's never any kind of paperwork filed. There's never any kind of formal processing whatsoever. There is not an arrest. No arrest takes place, right? So I feel like it makes sense to make a distinction between that and post-arrest diversion programs that while valuable and awesome and we support, obviously, do include that arrest that can produce those negative outcomes that we talked about. So I just like to hear from both of you kind of how you think about pre-arrest diversion versus post-arrest diversion, and if it makes sense to make a distinction between those two. Anyway, Richard, you could start.
I think the answer is yes, but it's not the only important distinction. And I mean we have trouble. We're using the term diversion. I mean, I sort of drew the line at not a formal case, but in many jurisdictions, diversion is also used for when there's some kind of consent decree or something that they agree not to take the case to adjudication. It goes to court, but then there's some kind of consent decree or deferred prosecution, and is that diversion or not? So it's sort of there's gray there, and there's also the what's the offer is another thing that some programs there it's a pre-arrest diversion, but if you don't do what you're told, they'll bring the arrest back and then you're back to court. There's some diversion programs for kids referred to court. Do what we tell you, or you're going right back into the court. And there's some that are not. That is like, okay, this is going to be handled outside of if a kid gets in a fight at school, is that a legal event, or is that something that's for the school discipline, or is it a pre-arrest thing where they're waiting to see if they've got the case number and they're just ready, they can just put a stamp on it and you're arrested now. So it's more complicated and more difficult.
Sure. Yeah. So Dr. Barrett, how do you guys think about kind of what safety net is versus kind of other diversion programs that happen further down the line, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, what's important is that we do call it pre-arrest or community-based diversion. And I think we keep that diversion label because we actually do have the parents and child sign a diversion contract. It is completely voluntary. We have had parents, refuse and say, no, we're not going to, say that, because we do ask them to say that, like, hey, this happened that could have been charged, and sometimes they'll consult an attorney and the attorney say, absolutely don't do that. We're going to bring this to court and we're going to get this dismissed. So it's voluntary, but it has expectations of what's going to be put in place. And so we use diversion because it is, there is a formal agreement. Now, we don't, like Richard, we're not going to, if you blow it off completely, we're not going to bring that charge forward. We both agree by signing into this, there's going to be no formal charge issued. I've seen deflection sometimes used as, oh, hey, Jamie shoplifted, but rather than charge, we're going to say, hey, don't do this again and make a referral to an after-school program, but there's no follow-up. And that's not every case, I understand, but I worry about deflection when it's kind of going back to that brooming that I talked about. And
right.
I think a lot of times that's problematic.
Yeah, so it's the follow-up piece that's key, right? It's deflection maybe sometimes is there's not enough follow-up, whereas diversion that does have that follow-up piece that
and a formality to it, and we are signing a contract. We're agreeing, yeah.
Sure. Yep. Yeah, that all makes sense. You're both researchers to a degree. I'm also a researcher. And in youth justice work, we often use recidivism as kind of a go-to metric for success. It's like, did this program decrease recidivism? Yes, okay, it's good. Again, one of the things I like about Cambridge is that you guys look at other things besides recidivism. I was just wondering from the two of you, what do you think are some other metrics we can use in youth justice to gauge the success of interventions? And why do you think that would be a good idea? Either of you can take this.
Sure. I mean, I think that one of the things that involvement in the justice system does is drastically reduce young people's attachment and success in school. So we can measure that. I think
educational attainment. Yeah.
I think that engagement in positive activities in the community is something that we can track. Mental health and well-being to the extent that there's identifiable challenges. How well are those kids doing on those challenges? Some programs, diversion programs, track those things, but not many, and that's unfortunate.
Dr. Barrett, do you guys track educational like high school dropout rates and stuff like that among safety net participants?
We don't do it formally. We tried actually to get school data kind of linked into our sets, and it's just been really tough, obviously due to like privacy concerns and things like that. So we haven't been able to formally track dropout rates for participants.
Yeah, that'd be interesting to know,
Yeah,
this
definitely.
that, keep kids in school longer. I mean,
And
that would alone
and
would be.
one thing, I was really proud when we started of dropping our juvenile arrest rate. It dropped by almost 75% in the city, and I was really proud of that. And then I think we dropped it for the right reasons, but as people pointed out to me, you know, in policing, you can drop arrest rates pretty drastically by just telling officers we want to arrest less for this stuff, but the kids still could get summonsed. Or so arrests are good at looking at, but they're not the be all end all, because a lot of times they can be, it's more of a discretionary thing, but a kid may still be getting sent to court. So you got to be careful with
It's
the
a measure
arrest.
of police activity to some degree,
Yeah,
rather
exactly.
than
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
actual juvenile
yeah.
delinquency, right? It's
Right, exactly.
Adult
yeah,
choices rather than kids' behavior.
Yeah.
yeah, right, yeah.
I think tracking
We got
serious violence, or tracking, is the community more dangerous? Is there more youth sort of serious crime going on?
Yeah.
Yes,
That's
right,
Definitely.
There's a few questions in the chat here I wanted to highlight. This one's for Dr. Barrett. Does Cambridge Safety Net use restorative justice dialogues as part of your programming?
Yeah, whenever we can introduce it, we actually we partner with a group, Citizens for Juvenile Justice, who help us do circles. And obviously, if there's a victim in the case, victim has to be, amenable to that. But yes, we do use restorative justice practices whenever we can work them, and actually they're terrific.
Yeah, that's wonderful to hear, because I think one of the pushbacks that you often get on deflection diversion programs is, what about youth accountability? What about the accountability?
Oh, yeah. Yep.
How do we hold youth accountable? And I think restorative justice is a great mechanism for accountability that actually provides a accountability rather than just a defensiveness. I was in a restorative justice circle not that long ago, and one of the young people, said to me basically, until this restorative justice process, I could not be honest about what actually happened. I was disincentivized by the traditional justice structure, the traditional court structure, to tell the truth. And I was finally able to tell the truth in this restorative justice process, which is, I think, a key piece of taking accountability for something that happened. It's just admitting what happened, right? And I think restorative justice really helps with that. So that's good to hear. The other question, another one for Dr. Barrett.
Just by the way,
go ahead.
I'm just finishing a report all about restorative justice diversion, and we'll be publishing it sometime in January.
Wonderful. Okay. Well, I will look out. I will look. Richard, I highly anticipate all your work, but I will extra highly anticipate that one, because combines two of my interests. So, another question from the chat here for Dr. Barrett. Does Cambridge have diversion programs geared toward youth with disabilities? It says here, often resources for youth with I/DD disability needs are not at the table, and they require specific supports and education of what they did and was not okay. So yeah, does Cambridge have diversion programs geared toward youth with disabilities?
I mean, our over the years through Safety Net, we have certainly diverted kids with that profile, and I think that is the critical importance of having your partners at the table. So it's I think one of the things about the Safety Net model is that it's not just police, like, oh, here's a kid who got in trouble, you guys deal with this. And it is a community accountability for what can we do. And so that's why having your mental health providers, your school folks who are always at our table, that includes folks who manage our special education teams, who help connect to those services, our departments of social services. So absolutely, if kids have any kind of profile where there's a disability, we are looking to tailor those services and tailor that to whatever the needs are. So yes.
Okay. What would the two of you say is the most critical factor, be it funding structure, shared data agreements, leadership buy-in, whatever it is, that can turn a successful pilot program, diversion pilot program, into a permanent, sustainable kind of institutionally embedded government function. I think safety net has pretty much achieved this. I mean, you said it's been around since 2008, so you have almost coming up on 2 decades here of the program. How did it go from a pilot into becoming something that has a lot of buy-in in the community?
For me, just real quick, when we started, we got some grants to help us launch. So I was full-time. I'm full-time with the Cambridge Police now. I was full-time with the Health Alliance when it launched. We got a Bureau of Justice Assistance grant to buy out my time to be able to help consult and build it. The key thing we did is we showed early results with the grants, and then we formalized it within the roles, not the people. It's the roles within the municipality, so that the people have changed. I'm fortunate enough to have stayed. A lot of the faces around me have changed, but it's in their roles. If you have this role in the school, this role within the police department, this role within the psychiatry department of CHA, part of your role is that you work on safety net, and it has to be the agreement that the city is willing to give that time, and that's sustainability. You don't know the amount of diversion programs, I'm sure Richard's seen the same thing, that have been dependent on grants. The grant goes away, it's pulled, whatever, 3 years, boom, it's gone. And that's so frustrating to see. So roles, not people. Demonstrate your effectiveness early if you need grant funding, but then you have to have a commitment from the city to make it sustainable.
Right. Yeah, Richard, go ahead.
Yeah, I tend to look more at the state policy level than local programming like that. But part of what I see is you need political will to make these kinds of changes, and you need sort of dedicated funding streams, not grant funding streams. So that's another. And in terms of programming, I've been doing this work on restorative justice. A lot of these programs, even the most successful ones with like random assignment studies showing drastic reductions in recidivism and better outcomes, they depend on the referrals from the justice system partners. And if those people turn over, those referrals can go away. And so it's really, it's challenging that way too.
Yeah, and to Dr. Barrett's point, I think oftentimes you see an awesome program, an awesome pilot project prop up, but after a while, it's kind of just held together by the people that kind of generated it to begin with, right? So you have these kind of champions for the program, but if they go away, then what happens to the program? Your point about basically building it into the job descriptions themselves. So any kind of subsequent turnover will, it's just part of the job, right? And I think that is such a key point in making these initiatives sustainable over time, because I've seen a lot kind of peter out before they even could show any good positive effects or anything like that. So yeah, just as we wrap up here, and we talked about restorative justice a little bit. In the traditional system, accountability means kind of sanctions and punishment. In a diversion model, it means taking responsibility while receiving support, right? And but what other kind of practical forms of accountability? We talked about restorative justice. Be it like completion of some service drug program, some completion of some kind of skills growth program. What kind of forms of accountability can we put in these that are most meaningful and achieve the long-term public safety outcomes that we want? Dr. Barrett, I don't know if you want to start.
I think one of the most important things, is that we look to address is what's going on with the kids' peer group and what are they doing outside of school, and we know that if a kid feels connected and is starting to develop, a positive identity, whether it be in athletics or theater or any of the the youth development activities, we're fortunate in Cambridge. We have very strong youth development programs. We have a great Mayor's Youth Summer program that pays kids to be involved in the arts or to be involved in learning different skills. So we're always trying to stress that, right? So, you know, we do a lot of work in like school threat assessment. And a lot of that is you're not just mitigating risk, you're enhancing the pro-social competency. So that's what we look to drive home when we're doing our plans is what can we do to just boost this kid's sense of like a pro-social identity. And a lot of times that has to do with who they're hanging out with and what they're doing outside of school.
I mean, it's difficult with the term accountability. There's tons of research. I mean, we're all familiar with the research on trauma and adverse childhood experiences. There's tons of now new research. Positive childhood experiences mitigate all of that. So connecting kids to positive things is really a key part of what works, but it doesn't fit in the sort of the accountability mindset. I think that the restorative justice approaches really do. If you look in the eye of the person that you've harmed, you make an apology, you work with that person and figure out a plan to repair those harms, that really is much more in line with anything that sort of really meets what accountability means. I mean, the justice system responses, probation, and especially incarceration, you just do your time. There's no active requirement for you to do anything to, I mean, accountability is a verb, or it should be, I mean, it's an action. And our justice system doesn't require that except checking boxes that somebody imposes on you, as opposed to a restorative process where you're actually going and fixing what you've broken.
Okay, yeah, that all makes sense. And one of the things that I will hear from critics of deflection diversion programs is this fear of net widening. So you would basically be bringing in youth who might have just been sent home with a warning, kind of that what'd you call it, the broomed away or swept under the rug, I suppose. But now you're kind of bringing them into a system of services and to some degree monitoring by justice officials. So I was just wondering from Dr. Barrett, what is the kind of objective eligibility criteria that you use for safety net? Like, how do you know that a child is right for the program?
Yeah, it's an excellent question, and we don't have hard and fast rules on eligibility. Like we'll sometimes divert felony offenses. There are some that don't do that. We always want to think critically about what's our goals and what are we. So I think to just broad strokes, like you're never looking to divert if it's like a disciplinary issue or a minor behavioral issue, or you do not want to be diverting for that. It's not appropriate, and there is a real danger of net widening. So we're usually looking at some pretty significant offenses if we're going to go the diversion route, a weapon in school, some kind of pretty significant, something that could be a pretty significant legal charge. And so, yeah, so you really want to stay clear of disciplinary, behavioral, attitudinal, certainly behavioral expressions of mental health conditions. You're not looking to divert, and you still unfortunately see that a lot, but that's where we try to draw the line. Is we really want it to be something like, whoa, we're concerned enough about this that it's endangering the student's safety or the safety of others that we're going to take a formal, because it still is police contact and we're still bringing them into a police station, and we're well aware of that. So we want to just make sure it's at that level before we engage in actual diversion.
Yeah, that's a great point. I just to the point of including more serious charges as being eligible for diversion. I've been talking up Richard's research this whole time, and he also just released another report about gun possession charges and how often firearm possession, weapon possession charges will disqualify you from diversion, and just the kind of the backwards nature of that, and these are particularly with non-violent. These are just weapon possession charges, because in a city like Chicago, for instance, it's illegal to own a firearm under the age of 21. Which makes it a status offense, and which there's a lot of research around status offenses. Because owning a firearm in a city like Chicago is a status offense because it's a crime only based on the person's age. So I would direct everyone to Richard's report on that topic because it's extremely good. But unfortunately, we are out of time, so we can't go into too much detail about it. But I do want to thank both of you. You guys are both rock stars in the juvenile justice field, and I just appreciate all the work you do so much. Yeah, so thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you all. Thanks for everyone for coming today. If you need anything more on diversion, deflection, I would hit up Richard's research, hit up my research, and hit up Dr. Barrett's research about safety net, because like I said, it is some of the best, most thorough and rigorous on any kind of diversion program in the country. So appreciate everyone coming by today, and I will see you next time. See you later.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.